Sarah Martinez had always been different from other women her age. While her friends were planning weddings and starting families, she was studying combat tactics and physical conditioning methods. At 28, she had already earned 3 degrees in sports science, military psychology, and tactical operations. Her small frame and quiet demeanor often fooled people into thinking she was just another academic. They couldn't have been more wrong. The daughter of a retired Marine sergeant, Sarah grew up understanding the military mindset. Her father, Miguel Martinez, had served 2 tours in Vietnam and came home with stories that shaped Sarah's understanding of what real courage looked like. He never pushed his military values on her, but Sarah absorbed them anyway. She learned that strength wasn't always about size or loudness. Sometimes the strongest people were the ones who stayed calm when everyone else was falling apart. After college, Sarah worked for several private military contractors, developing training programs for special operations units around the world. Her methods were unconventional but effective. She combined traditional military training with cutting-edge sports psychology and performance enhancement techniques. Word of her success spread quickly through military circles. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March 2018. Captain James Sullivan from Naval Special Warfare Command was on the line. The Navy SEALs needed someone to redesign their training program. Too many promising candidates were washing out during the infamous Hell Week, not because they lacked physical ability, but because they couldn't handle the mental pressure. Traditional military instructors weren't getting the results they needed. "We've heard about your work with the Rangers," Captain Sullivan said. "We need someone who can push our candidates harder than they've ever been pushed, but also teach them how to push through when their minds tell them to quit." Sarah knew this was the opportunity she'd been waiting for. Training Navy SEALs was considered the pinnacle of military instruction. It was also a world dominated entirely by men. No woman had ever been given the responsibility of redesigning SEAL training protocols. "I'll need complete authority over the program," Sarah told the captain. "No interference from your current instructors. If you want results, you have to trust my methods." There was a long pause. "That's a big ask, Ms. Martinez. These men have been training SEALs for decades. And how are those methods working out for you?" Sarah replied calmly. "I can increase your success rate by 30% within 6 months. But only if you let me do it my way." Captain Sullivan agreed to give her a trial period, 6 months to prove her methods worked. If she failed, she'd be quietly dismissed. If she succeeded, she'd become the first civilian woman to hold a permanent position in SEAL training operations. Sarah arrived at the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in California on a humid Monday morning. The sprawling facility overlooked the Pacific Ocean, and she could hear the sound of waves crashing against the shore as she walked toward the training compound. The sight was intimidating even for someone with her experience. This was where legends were made and dreams were broken. The base personnel were polite but distant. They'd been told a civilian contractor was coming to observe their training methods. Nobody mentioned that the contractor was a woman, and Sarah could see the surprise in their eyes when she introduced herself. Some tried to hide their skepticism. Others didn't bother. Master Chief Petty Officer Rick Thompson was Sarah's primary contact. A 20-year veteran with multiple deployments, he had the weathered look of someone who'd seen more combat than most people could imagine. He was respectful but clearly doubtful about Sarah's ability to contribute anything meaningful to their program. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we've been training the world's finest warriors for over 50 years, he said as he walked her through the facility. "I'm not sure what a civilian can teach us that we don't already know." Sarah understood his perspective. Trust had to be earned, especially in this environment. "I'm not here to replace what you're doing, Master Chief. I'm here to make it better. Give me 2 weeks to observe your current methods. Then we'll talk about improvements." For the next 14 days, Sarah watched everything. She observed classroom instruction, physical training sessions, and the brutal Hell Week simulations that determined who would continue in the program. She took detailed notes but said very little. The instructors and candidates began to relax around her, treating her more like a piece of furniture than a threat to their established order. What Sarah saw concerned her. The training was physically demanding, which was necessary, but the psychological approach was outdated and ineffective. Instructors relied heavily on intimidation and humiliation tactics that might have worked decades ago, but weren't suitable for modern candidates. Too many promising individuals were being eliminated not because they lacked ability, but because the training methods weren't designed to help them succeed. She also noticed something else. The candidates who made it through weren't necessarily the strongest or fastest. They were the ones who had developed mental strategies for dealing with stress and pain. They'd learned to compartmentalize their suffering and focus on the task at hand. The problem was that this learning happened by accident, not by design. Sarah began developing her new training protocols. She would keep all the physical challenges that made SEAL training legendary, but she would add structured psychological preparation that would give candidates the mental tools they needed to succeed. It was a radical departure from traditional methods, and she knew it would face significant resistance. The real test would come when she started implementing her changes. She would be working with men who were used to doing things their way, in an environment where tradition was sacred. Sarah had faced skepticism before, but never at this level. The stakes had never been higher, and failure wasn't an option. As she finalized her training proposals in her temporary office overlooking the Pacific, Sarah thought about her father's words from years earlier. "Mia, the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought with ideas and determination. Never back down when you know you're right." She had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. Sarah's first major test came 3 weeks into her tenure at Coronado. She had convinced Captain Sullivan to let her work with a group of 24 SEAL candidates who were struggling with the current program. These men had already failed Hell Week once and were getting a second chance. Under normal circumstances, most of them would wash out again. "These candidates represent everything that's wrong with our current approach," Sarah told Master Chief Thompson as they watched the group run morning exercises. "They have the physical ability and the mental toughness. They just haven't been taught how to access it under extreme stress." Master Chief Thompson crossed his arms and studied the group. Several of the candidates were already showing signs of fatigue, and the real challenges hadn't even begun. "What exactly are you planning to do differently?" "Watch and learn," Sarah replied with quiet confidence. Sarah's new approach shocked everyone at the facility. Instead of starting with physical punishment, she began with education. She taught the candidates about the neurological response to stress, explaining how their brains would try to convince them to quit when things got difficult. She showed them breathing techniques used by professional athletes and meditation practices borrowed from ancient warrior traditions. "Your mind is like a muscle," she told the group during their first session. "It can be trained to perform under pressure just like your body. But first you need to understand how it works." The traditional instructors watched with skepticism as Sarah had the candidates practice visualization exercises and stress inoculation drills. Some openly mocked her methods, calling them touchy-feely nonsense and predicting complete failure. But something remarkable began to happen. The candidates who had been struggling started showing improvement. They were handling physical challenges that had broken them just weeks earlier. More importantly, they were helping each other instead of focusing solely on individual survival. Petty Officer First Class David Kim was one of Sarah's biggest success stories. A Korean-American from Los Angeles, Kim had incredible physical abilities but had failed Hell Week because of panic attacks during underwater training. Traditional instructors had written him off as mentally weak. Sarah saw something different. "Your panic isn't a sign of weakness," she explained to Kim during a private session. "It's your brain trying to protect you. We're going to teach it that you're actually safer underwater than it thinks." Using graduated exposure therapy combined with breathing techniques, Sarah helped Kim overcome his fear. Within a month, he was not only completing underwater training but excelling at it. The transformation amazed everyone who witnessed it. Another candidate, Marcus Williams, had grown up in Detroit's toughest neighborhoods. He had the mental toughness that came from surviving on the streets, but he struggled with the structured environment of military training. Sarah worked with him to channel his natural resilience into military discipline. "You already know how to survive impossible situations," she told Williams. "Now we're going to teach you how to help others survive too." The breakthrough moment came during a modified Hell Week that Sarah designed. Instead of the traditional approach of constant harassment and sleep deprivation, she created scenarios that required problem-solving under pressure. Candidates had to work together to overcome obstacles while dealing with physical exhaustion and stress. Traditional instructors predicted disaster. They were wrong. 22 of the 24 candidates completed the week successfully. This was unprecedented. Under the old system, a 70% failure rate was considered normal. Sarah had achieved a 92% success rate with candidates who had already failed once. Word of Sarah's success spread quickly through the special operations community. Requests began coming in from other units wanting to learn her methods. Sarah found herself training not just SEAL candidates, but instructors from various special operations forces. The men she trained began to see her not just as an instructor, but as someone who genuinely cared about their success. Sarah never tried to prove she was tough by being harsh or unforgiving. Instead, she pushed them harder than they'd ever been pushed by helping them discover strengths they didn't know they had. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison was among the first group of instructors Sarah retrained. A decorated SEAL with 3 combat deployments, Morrison had initially been one of her harshest critics. He thought her methods were too soft for the brutal realities of special operations. These men are going to face life-or-death situations, he argued during one heated discussion. We can't coddle them during training. I'm not coddling anyone, Sarah replied calmly. I'm teaching them to be stronger than they thought possible. There's a difference between breaking someone down and building them up. Morrison's opinion changed when he saw the results firsthand. Candidates trained using Sarah's methods weren't just completing their programs. They were excelling in ways that surprised even seasoned instructors. They showed better teamwork, improved decision-making under stress, and stronger leadership abilities. More importantly, they retained these skills when they moved on to operational units. Reports came back from deployed SEAL teams that the new graduates were performing exceptionally well in combat situations. Sarah's training wasn't just helping them survive SEAL school, it was making them better warriors. As months passed, Sarah developed close professional relationships with many of the SEALs she trained. They respected her expertise and appreciated her genuine concern for their development. She never tried to be one of the guys, but she earned something more valuable than acceptance. She earned their trust. The candidates gave her a nickname, the Professor. It started as gentle teasing because of her academic background, but it evolved into a term of respect. When someone said they had been trained by the Professor, other SEALs knew they were talking about someone special. Sarah's success attracted attention from the highest levels of Naval Special Warfare Command. Admiral Patricia Hayes, the first woman to lead a Special Operations Command, visited Coronado to observe Sarah's training methods personally. The Admiral was impressed not just by the results, but by the way Sarah had earned the respect of one of the military's most traditional communities. You've accomplished something remarkable here, Admiral Hayes told Sarah after observing a training session. You've changed not just how we train, but how we think about training. By the end of her first year, Sarah had transformed the SEAL training program. Graduation rates had improved dramatically, and the quality of graduates was higher than ever. She had proven that innovation and tradition could work together to create something better than either could achieve alone. But success in military circles often comes with unexpected challenges. As Sarah's reputation grew, so did the scrutiny of her position. Some people began questioning whether a civilian woman should have so much influence over the training of America's elite warriors. The same success that had validated her methods also made her a target for those who believed some traditions should never change. Sarah sensed the growing tension, but chose to focus on her work. She had proven herself once and was confident she could do it again. What she didn't realize was that the biggest test of her career was still ahead of her. The trouble began on a September morning when Sarah arrived at Coronado to find her security clearance had been suspended. The base guards, men she had greeted every morning for over a year, looked uncomfortable as they delivered the news. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had always been friendly, couldn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't let you on base until this gets sorted out, he said, holding up a red-flagged security document. Orders came down this morning. Sarah stared at the paperwork in disbelief. Her clearance had never been questioned before. She had undergone extensive background checks when she first started working with the SEALs, and everything had been approved without issue. Nothing in her life had changed that would warrant a security review. Did they give you any details about why the clearance was suspended? She asked. Rodriguez shook his head. Just says pending review of foreign contacts and potential security risks. You'll need to contact the security office for more information. Sarah spent the rest of the day making phone calls and trying to understand what had happened. The security office gave her vague answers about routine reviews and administrative procedures. No one could tell her what specific concerns had triggered the suspension or how long the review process would take. Captain Sullivan was equally confused when Sarah reached him. "This doesn't make sense," he said over the phone. "Your clearance was just renewed 6 months ago. I'll make some calls and see what I can find out." While Sarah waited for answers, rumors began circulating on base. Some people whispered that her innovative training methods had attracted unwanted attention from foreign intelligence services. Others suggested that her success had made certain people in Washington uncomfortable. The truth was more disturbing than either theory. The investigation had been triggered by a complaint filed by Congressman Robert Harrison, a member of the House Armed Services Committee. Harrison had built his political career on appeals to traditional military values and opposition to what he called social engineering in the armed forces. He had been quietly gathering information about Sarah's program for months. Harrison's complaint questioned whether a civilian contractor, especially a woman, should have access to classified SEAL training methods. He argued that her presence represented a security risk and violated the traditional masculine culture that made special operations forces effective. The complaint was carefully worded to avoid appearing overtly sexist while raising serious questions about operational security. The congressman had powerful allies in the Pentagon who shared his concerns about changing military traditions. These officials had been looking for an opportunity to challenge Sarah's position without appearing to oppose her successful training methods. Harrison's complaint gave them the political cover they needed. Sarah learned about the complaint through informal channels when Master Chief Thompson called her at home. "Ma'am, I think you should know what's really going on," he said in a voice heavy with frustration. "This isn't about your security clearance. This is about politics." Thompson explained what he had learned from contacts in Washington. The suspension was designed to remove Sarah from her position without directly challenging her methods or results. By questioning her security clearance, her opponents could sideline her while claiming they were simply following proper procedures. "They can't argue with your success," Thompson told her, "so they're attacking your right to be here instead." The news hit Sarah harder than any physical challenge she had ever faced. She had spent 18 months proving herself through results, only to discover that some people would never accept her presence regardless of her achievements. The men she had trained respected her, but that wasn't enough for the people who controlled her fate. Sarah's suspension created an immediate problem for the SEAL training program. Her replacement was Colonel Richard Barnes, a traditional instructor with decades of experience but no knowledge of Sarah's innovative methods. Barnes had been selected specifically because he represented a return to conventional training approaches. Within days of Barnes taking over, the training environment began to change. The psychological preparation sessions that Sarah had developed were eliminated. The collaborative problem-solving exercises were replaced with traditional punishment-based conditioning. The educational components that helped candidates understand stress responses were dismissed as unnecessary. The candidates currently in the program noticed the changes immediately. David Kim, who had overcome his panic attacks through Sarah's methods, found himself struggling again as the old intimidation tactics returned. Marcus Williams, who had learned to channel his street toughness into military discipline, clashed repeatedly with instructors who didn't understand his background. Lieutenant Commander Morrison watched the regression with growing frustration. He had become one of Sarah's strongest supporters after seeing how her methods improved both training results and the quality of graduates. Now he was being ordered to abandon techniques that he knew worked. "This is insane," Morrison told Master Chief Thompson after a particularly difficult training session. "We're throwing away everything we learned because of politics." Thompson agreed but felt powerless to change the situation. "Orders are orders," he replied grimly, "but I don't have to like them." The impact extended beyond the current training class. Sarah had been developing advanced programs for experienced SEALs and working on research projects that could benefit special operations forces worldwide. All of that work was now suspended indefinitely. Meanwhile, Sarah continued fighting the security clearance suspension through official channels. She hired a lawyer who specialized in military security cases and submitted extensive documentation, proving that the investigation was unfounded. But the bureaucratic process moved slowly, and she had no guarantee of success. The stress began taking its toll on Sarah both professionally and personally. She had dedicated her career to improving military training, and now she was being forced to watch her life's work being dismantled for political reasons. Friends and colleagues expressed support privately, but few were willing to speak out publicly on her behalf. The most painful aspect was the silence from some of the people she had expected to support her. Captain Sullivan, who had initially championed her appointment, became increasingly distant as pressure mounted from his superiors. Admiral Hayes, who had praised Sarah's innovations just months earlier, was now unreachable through official channels. Sarah realized she was fighting a battle that couldn't be won through conventional means. The people who opposed her position had the power to destroy her career, regardless of her achievements or the merit of her case. They could simply drag out the security review indefinitely while her replacement consolidated control over the training program. The situation reached a breaking point when Sarah received notification that her temporary access to base facilities was being revoked entirely. Even her ability to retrieve personal items from her office was restricted. She was being systematically erased from the program she had built. Standing outside the gates of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado for what might be the last time, Sarah felt a crushing sense of defeat. She had proven that innovation could improve military training, but that wasn't enough to overcome institutional resistance to change. Her success had made her a target, and now she was paying the price for challenging tradition. What Sarah didn't know was that the men she had trained were watching these developments with growing anger. They understood what was happening to their instructor, and they were beginning to discuss what they could do about it. The bonds Sarah had built through genuine care and professional excellence were about to be tested in ways no one could have predicted. Sarah's world collapsed over the following weeks. The security clearance review dragged on without resolution, effectively ending her career in military training. Her lawyer warned her that the process could take months or even years, and there was no guarantee of a favorable outcome. The people orchestrating her removal had created a perfect bureaucratic trap. The financial impact hit immediately. Sarah's contract with Naval Special Warfare Command had been suspended, cutting off her primary source of income. Other potential clients in the defense sector began distancing themselves from her, unwilling to risk association with someone under security investigation. Word traveled fast in the tight-knit special operations community, and Sarah found herself professionally radioactive. She was forced to move out of her apartment, near Coronado, and into a smaller place in a less expensive part of San Diego. The view of the ocean that had inspired her during her most challenging days was replaced by a cramped studio apartment with a view of a parking lot. Sarah had never been motivated primarily by money, but the sudden financial pressure added stress to an already overwhelming situation. The isolation was even harder to bear than the financial strain. Colleagues who had praised her work privately now avoided her calls. Conference invitations were quietly withdrawn. Research partnerships that had taken years to build evaporated overnight. Sarah discovered how quickly professional relationships could disappear when someone became politically inconvenient. Her father, Miguel, flew out from Texas to spend a week with her when he realized how badly she was struggling. The retired Marine had seen enough military politics during his own career to understand what his daughter was facing. "Mija, this isn't about your work," he told her as they walked along the beach near her old apartment. "This is about people who are afraid of change. You threatened their comfortable little world and now they're striking back." "But I proved my methods work, Dad," Sarah replied, her voice breaking with frustration. "The results speak for themselves. How can they just ignore that?" Miguel stopped walking and turned to face his daughter. "Because results don't matter when people's egos are at stake. You made them look bad by succeeding where they had failed. That's unforgivable in their minds." Meanwhile, the situation at Coronado was deteriorating rapidly. Colonel Barnes had completely dismantled Sarah's training program and returned to traditional methods. The results were predictably disappointing. Failure rates climbed back to previous levels, and the quality of graduates declined noticeably. David Kim, who had successfully overcome his panic attacks under Sarah's guidance, washed out during his second attempt at underwater training. The breathing techniques and mental preparation strategies that had worked before were no longer being taught. When Kim panicked during a critical exercise, the instructors simply marked him as a failure and moved on to the next candidate. Marcus Williams fared better physically, but struggled with the return to purely punitive training methods. The collaborative problem-solving approach that had helped him channel his street toughness into military discipline was gone. Instead, instructors tried to break down his natural defenses without providing alternative coping mechanisms. Williams completed the program but emerged angry and resentful, rather than confident and motivated. Lieutenant Commander Morrison watched the regression with growing dismay. He had seen firsthand how Sarah's methods created better warriors, not just survivors. Now he was being forced to train men using techniques he knew were inferior. The professional pride that had defined his career was being undermined by political considerations he couldn't control. "We're failing these men," Morrison told Master Chief Thompson after another disappointing training session. "They deserve better than this," Thompson nodded grimly. The professor knew how to bring out the best in people. Barnes just knows how to break them down. Word of the declining training results began reaching deployed SEAL teams. The men who had been trained using Sarah's methods could see the difference in newer team members. The collaborative skills, stress management techniques, and psychological resilience that had made recent graduates so effective were missing from the latest arrivals. Senior Chief Petty Officer Mike Rodriguez, who had completed Sarah's program 2 years earlier, was particularly vocal about the decline. His current deployment in the Middle East had given him the opportunity to work with SEALs trained under different systems, and the contrast was stark. "The guys trained by the professor are different," Rodriguez told his teammates during a rare quiet moment at their forward operating base. "They handle stress better, work together more effectively, and make better decisions under pressure. The new guys are tough, but they don't have those same skills." Similar conversations were taking place in SEAL teams around the world. The men Sarah had trained were becoming informal leaders and mentors, sharing the techniques they had learned, even though they were no longer being formally taught. Sarah's influence was surviving despite the official efforts to erase it. But Sarah herself knew nothing about this quiet resistance to the changes. Cut off from the military community that had become her professional home, she felt completely isolated. She spent her days applying for civilian jobs that seemed meaningless compared to the work she had been doing. Her nights were filled with doubt and regret. The breaking point came when Sarah learned that her security clearance had been officially revoked. The decision letter cited concerns about foreign contacts and potential conflicts of interest, but provided no specific details. Her lawyer explained that appealing the decision would be extremely difficult and expensive, with little chance of success. Sarah stared at the letter for a long time, feeling the weight of defeat settle over her. Everything she had worked for was gone. The program she had built was being dismantled. The men she had trained were being let down by inferior methods, and there was nothing she could do about any of it. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment and considered giving up entirely. She could move back to Texas, take a job in civilian fitness training, and try to forget about her brief time in the elite world of special operations. It would be easier than continuing to fight a battle she couldn't win. She was writing a letter of resignation from all military-related work when her phone rang. The number was blocked, but something made her answer. "Professor Martinez?" The voice was familiar, but she couldn't immediately place it. "This is Sarah Martinez." "Who is this?" "Ma'am, this is David Kim. I know I'm not supposed to be calling you, but I had to thank you for what you taught me. Even though I washed out, the techniques you showed me have helped me in ways you can't imagine." Sarah was shocked to hear from one of her former students. Contact with active duty SEALs could potentially make her legal situation worse, but she couldn't bring herself to hang up. "David, I'm sorry about what happened to the program. You deserved better than what they gave you. Ma'am, that's why I'm calling. We know what they did to you wasn't right, and we're not going to let them get away with it." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "I can't say much on an open line, but you should know that a lot of us are talking. The professor taught us to never leave a teammate behind. That includes you." Kim hung up before Sarah could respond, leaving her staring at her phone in confusion and growing hope. She didn't understand what Kim meant about not letting them get away with it. But for the first time in weeks, she felt like she wasn't completely alone. What Sarah didn't know was that her former students were indeed talking, and their conversations were moving beyond simple complaints about training quality. Some of the most elite warriors in the American military were beginning to plan something unprecedented. The movement began quietly in deployment camps and training facilities around the world. SEALs who had been trained by Sarah started sharing their experiences and comparing notes about the decline in training quality since her removal. What started as casual conversations between teammates evolved into something more organized and determined. Senior Chief Mike Rodriguez was deployed in Afghanistan when he first learned the full details of what had happened to Sarah. A secure communication from his former instructor, Lieutenant Commander Morrison, explained the political maneuvering that had led to her removal. Rodriguez read the message twice before the full implications sank in. They destroyed her career because she was too successful, Rodriguez told his team leader, Chief Petty Officer Tony Vasquez, another graduate of Sarah's program. This wasn't about security or procedures. This was about politics. Vasquez had suspected something was wrong when he heard about Sarah's sudden departure, but the truth was worse than he had imagined. The professor saved my career, he said quietly. I was ready to quit before her program taught me how to handle the pressure. Now they're pretending she never existed. Similar conversations were taking place in SEAL teams across multiple continents. The men Sarah had trained formed an informal network that transcended normal military hierarchy. They began using secure channels to coordinate their response, treating Sarah's situation like a mission that required careful planning and execution. The unofficial leader of this effort was Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the instructor who had initially opposed Sarah's methods before becoming one of her strongest supporters. Morrison had access to information about the political forces behind Sarah's removal, and he was in a position to coordinate action from within the system. Morrison reached out to Admiral Patricia Hayes, who had praised Sarah's work before the political pressure mounted. The Admiral agreed to a private meeting at a coffee shop off base, away from official channels that might be monitored by Sarah's opponents. Admiral, you know what they did to Martinez was wrong, Morrison said without preamble. Her methods worked better than anything we've ever used. The results prove it. Admiral Hayes looked tired as she stirred her coffee. Jake, I know you're right, but I have to pick my battles carefully. The political climate around this issue is toxic right now. With respect, ma'am, this isn't about politics. This is about honor. Sarah Martinez made us better at what we do, and we threw her away because some politicians were uncomfortable with change. What exactly are you asking me to do? Hayes asked. Morrison leaned forward. We're putting together a formal statement from SEALs who were trained using her methods. We want to document the impact of her work and request that her security clearance be reinstated. Will you support us? Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Supporting Morrison's initiative could damage her own career, especially if Congressman Harrison and his allies decided to retaliate. But she had not risen to flag rank by avoiding difficult decisions. Send me the statement when you're finished, she said finally. I'll review it and consider my options. Morrison's team worked for weeks gathering testimonials from SEALs around the world. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of operators volunteered detailed accounts of how Sarah's training had improved their performance in combat situations. Others described specific techniques they had learned that had saved lives during deployments. Master Chief Thompson contributed his own statement, despite knowing it could end his career. Sarah Martinez revolutionized how we prepare warriors for combat, he wrote. Removing her from the program was not just a disservice to her, but a betrayal of every SEAL who benefits from superior training. The most powerful testimonials came from deployed teams who could speak directly about operational effectiveness. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez wrote about a mission in Syria, where the stress management techniques Sarah had taught helped his team complete a critical rescue operation. Under extreme pressure, the breathing exercises and mental preparation methods I learned from Professor Martinez allowed me to stay calm when everything was falling apart, Rodriguez wrote. Without that training, the mission would have failed and American lives would have been lost. Chief Vasquez described how Sarah's emphasis on team cohesion had improved his unit's performance during a particularly dangerous deployment in Africa. The professor taught us that individual toughness means nothing without team trust, he wrote. That lesson has kept my team alive during multiple combat operations. As word of the testimonial project spread, support came from unexpected quarters. Rangers, Green Berets, and Marines who had attended Sarah's advanced training programs contributed their own statements. The initiative was growing beyond the SEAL community into a broader special operations effort. The breakthrough came when retired Admiral William Patterson agreed to endorse the testimonials. Patterson was a legendary figure in naval special warfare, who commanded enormous respect throughout the military. His support gave the initiative credibility that could not be easily dismissed. Sarah Martinez represents the best of American military innovation, Patterson wrote in his endorsement. Removing her from her position based on political considerations rather than performance is a disservice to the warriors she trained and the nation they serve. Meanwhile, Sarah remained unaware of the growing movement on her behalf. She had found temporary work as a fitness consultant for a civilian gym, a job that paid the bills but felt meaningless compared to her previous work. The gym's clients were primarily middle-aged professionals trying to lose weight, a far cry from training elite warriors for combat. Sarah's lawyer had advised her to maintain a low profile while the appeals process continued. Any public statements or media appearances could be used against her by opponents who wanted to portray her as seeking attention or trying to circumvent proper procedures. So Sarah suffered in silence, believing she had been abandoned by the military community she had served. The turning point came when Morrison and his team decided to make their testimonials public. They released the statements to military news outlets and selected mainstream media, accompanied by Admiral Patterson's endorsement and a formal request for Sarah's reinstatement. The story exploded across military social media and news sites. Headlines like "Elite SEALs Demand Return of Groundbreaking Female Trainer" and "Navy's Most Elite Warriors Stand Up for Fired Instructor" appeared on websites and social platforms. The testimonials provided compelling evidence that Sarah's removal had weakened American military readiness. Congressman Harrison and his allies were caught off guard by the public campaign. They had expected Sarah to quietly disappear after her security clearance was revoked. Instead, they found themselves facing organized opposition from some of the most respected warriors in the American military. Harrison's office released a statement defending the security review process and suggesting that the SEALs supporting Sarah had been manipulated by political interests. The response only intensified the backlash from the special operations community. "Nobody manipulates SEALs," Morrison told a reporter from Navy Times. "We're speaking out because we know the difference between good training and bad training. Sarah Martinez provided the best training we've ever received, and losing her made us less effective at protecting America." Sarah learned about the campaign when a reporter called her apartment looking for comment. She was stunned to discover that dozens of the men she had trained were publicly advocating for her return. The isolation and despair that had dominated her life for months began to crack as she realized she had not been forgotten. But the most dramatic show of support was still to come. Morrison and his allies had planned something unprecedented that would force the military establishment to confront the consequences of their political maneuvering. The guards at Coronado were about to witness something they had never seen before. The morning started like any other for Staff Sergeant Rodriguez at the Coronado gate. He arrived for his shift expecting the usual routine of checking identification cards and monitoring vehicle access. What he didn't expect was to see Sarah Martinez walking toward the gate at exactly 800 hours, accompanied by a growing crowd of men in military dress uniforms. Sarah had received a call the night before from Lieutenant Commander Morrison. "Professor, meet us at the main gate tomorrow morning at 8, he had said simply. "It's time to come home." Sarah had spent the night wondering what Morrison meant, but something in his voice convinced her to trust him one more time. She dressed carefully in her best professional attire and drove to Coronado, not knowing what to expect but feeling hopeful for the first time in months. As she approached the gate, Sarah gasped at what she saw. Nearly 50 active-duty SEALs were assembled in perfect formation, wearing their dress blue uniforms with ribbons and decorations that told stories of courage and sacrifice. These were men from multiple units, some of whom had traveled across the country to be present for this moment. At the front of the formation stood the men whose careers Sarah had directly impacted. David Kim was there, despite having been eliminated from SEAL training. Marcus Williams stood next to him, along with dozens of others who had benefited from Sarah's innovative methods. Behind them were senior operators like Chief Vasquez and Master Chief Thompson, men whose support carried enormous weight within the special operations community. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez recognized many of the faces, but had never seen anything like this formation. These were some of the most elite warriors in the American military, and they were all there for one reason: to support Sarah Martinez. Morrison stepped forward as Sarah approached the gate. "Ma'am, we're here to escort you back to work," he said formally. "These men represent every SEAL team that has been touched by your training methods. We're not leaving until you're reinstated." Rodriguez found himself in an impossible position. His orders were clear. Sarah's security clearance had been revoked and she was not permitted on base. But facing him were dozens of decorated SEALs who were peacefully but firmly demanding her access. Some of these men had saved his life during deployments. Others were legends within the special operations community. "Sir, I understand your position," Rodriguez said to Morrison, "but I have my orders. Ms. Martinez cannot enter the base without proper clearance." "We understand your situation, Rodriguez," replied Master Chief Thompson, stepping forward, "but we have our orders too. Orders from our consciences and our honor. The professor is coming through this gate today." The standoff attracted immediate attention from base personnel and media outlets that had been covering the story. News crews arrived to document the unprecedented protest by active duty special operations forces. The image of dozens of SEALs in dress uniforms standing behind a small woman who had been denied access to the base became an instant symbol of the controversy. Captain Sullivan received urgent calls from multiple superiors demanding that he resolve the situation immediately. The sight of elite warriors publicly defying military authority was a public relations nightmare that was being broadcast live on national news. But Sullivan also understood that forcing a confrontation with his own SEALs would create an even bigger disaster. Admiral Hayes arrived at the scene within an hour. Having been alerted by her staff about the developing situation, she surveyed the formation of SEALs and realized that this was not a typical military protest. These men were putting their careers on the line for someone they believed had been wrongly treated. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," Hayes called out as she approached the gate. "I need to speak with you privately." Morrison stepped away from the formation but remained within sight of his fellow SEALs. "Admiral, these men have volunteered to end their careers if that's what it takes to support Professor Martinez. They're not backing down." Hayes looked at the assembled warriors and understood the gravity of the moment. These were not rebellious soldiers seeking attention. These were professional warriors making a statement about honor and loyalty that transcended military hierarchy. "What exactly are you asking for?" Hayes asked. "We want Professor Martinez's security clearance reinstated immediately," Morrison replied. "We want her training program restored, and we want assurance that no retaliation will be taken against anyone involved in supporting her." Hayes knew she was facing a moment that would define her own legacy. She could order the SEALs to disperse and face the consequences of their defiance, or she could use her authority to address their concerns. The choice would be remembered long after this day ended. "Give me 30 minutes, Hayes told Morrison. "Keep your men in formation, but do not enter the base until I return." Hayes made a series of phone calls that reached the highest levels of the Pentagon and naval operations. She spoke with admirals, generals, and senior Pentagon officials, explaining that the situation at Coronado was becoming a national embarrassment that could damage military morale and recruitment. The breakthrough came when Admiral Patterson's endorsement gave political cover to officials who wanted to support Sarah but had been afraid to act. The retired admiral's phone calls to his former colleagues emphasized that resolving the situation honorably was essential for military credibility. Meanwhile, Congressman Harrison's political position was becoming untenable. The images of decorated SEALs supporting Sarah had generated massive public sympathy for her cause. Veterans organizations and military families were flooding congressional offices with calls demanding her reinstatement. Harrison's staff advised him to find a face-saving way to back down. Hayes returned to the gate exactly 30 minutes later, carrying a folder of documents. She approached Sarah directly, ignoring military protocol that would normally require her to address the senior officer present first. "Ms. Martinez," Hayes said formally, "by the authority of Naval Special Warfare Command, your security clearance is hereby reinstated effective immediately. You are authorized to resume your duties as senior training consultant for SEAL preparation programs." The SEALs behind Sarah erupted in cheers that could be heard across the base. Rodriguez stepped aside and opened the gate, saluting Sarah as she walked through. The formation of warriors fell in behind her, creating an honor guard that escorted her back to the training facility she had built. The media coverage of Sarah's triumphant return generated national attention and sparked broader conversations about military innovation and resistance to change. Her story became a symbol of how institutional courage could overcome political cowardice when people were willing to stand up for what was right. Sarah resumed her work with renewed authority and support from the highest levels of naval command. Her training methods were not only restored but expanded to other special operations units. The men who had stood with her at the gate became informal ambassadors for her approaches, spreading her techniques throughout the special operations community. Years later, Sarah would reflect on that morning at the Coronado Gate as the moment she truly understood the power of the bonds she had built through her work. The SEALs she had trained had not just learned combat skills from her. They had learned about loyalty, courage, and the importance of standing up for what was right. They taught me something that day, Sarah would say in interviews about the experience. I had spent years teaching them to be better warriors, but when it mattered most, they taught me what it really means to never leave a teammate behind. The guards at Coronado still talk about that September morning when dozens of America's most elite warriors stood in formation to support a woman who had been told she couldn't stay. It was a reminder that true strength comes not from following orders blindly, but from having the courage to do what is right even when it requires personal sacrifice. Sarah Martinez continued her work for many more years, training thousands of special operations personnel using methods that revolutionized military preparation. But she never forgot the lesson learned that day, that honor and loyalty are not just words in a military code. They are principles worth fighting for, even when the battle seems impossible to win.